Government versus big tech, the Facebook and Google lawsuits. The full battle royal has begun. Remember, like in wrestling, where it's like, and even in some of the multiplayer games, they drop 100 people in and they see who the last one standing is. So it's becoming a little bit of a free-for-all, but organized into two camps, government and big tech. I'm going to talk about that in terms of which one is more powerful. So a lot of the government world organizations like the IMF and the World Bank and even the United Nations, they've been very pro-globalization, which is pro-business, that trade is good and that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that there'll be more people brought in the middle class, and there'll be greater jobs and greater access to goods because of globalization. But as a result of the globalization, companies became a lot of time more powerful than governments, because they could hide their taxes and they could do regulatory capture and kind of like almost buy or influence elections or electors. So it was kind of like a hands-off attitude, and especially in the United States, they didn't want to break up the companies because fear that the Chinese companies would become more powerful. That's still a fear. But with this recent action against Facebook and Google, it swung the other way. And part of it is because due to the pandemic, two different factors in the pandemic. One is that it's hard to have globalization when you can't leave your house and you're under a stay-at-home order. But another thing is that, the pandemic has kind of been the end of small and medium-sized business in a large sense, because even though they had some of the PPE loans, they don't have the resources to compete during a pandemic as against the big tech companies. And people, it's not only a flight to safety and a flight to quality, but it's also what I call a flight to technology. That, with everybody using Zoom and Microsoft Teams and things like that, the big boys, have the resources to do all these things, whereas the small people don't. So it's interesting with the Facebook versus the Google. Now Europe has kind of been like the leader in antitrust. They've been really aggressive, like, the amount of fines they've done. But America is starting to step up the pace also. So it's kind of like this battle to see, who's going to be stronger. And just a couple of thoughts on that. So, some people feel like if you break up Facebook, by deleveraging, forcing the Instagram and WhatsApp to become, separate companies, that's actually going to make Facebook stronger, because they, at least from an investor standpoint, that the values of Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook is much more than, when you unlock all that value, and then Facebook will just be able to focus on their core competency. Obviously, they have a lot of money invested in, WhatsApp and Instagram. So, they would, even though if they divested it, they would get a lot of money from that. They would lose that advantage, and also like their business model would be imperiled, because their business model has been kind of like catch or capture. Now, Amazon, some people are saying, are going to do a preemptive strike, perhaps by divesting Amazon Web Services. Some people feel that Amazon Web Services would be one of the most valuable companies on its own right now. I think Amazon is the most vulnerable, because Facebook is still profitable without Instagram and WhatsApp, but Amazon's a bigger threat. I mean, because Amazon Web Services is so profitable and contributes so much money to the bottom line. Like I've talked about before, Amazon has traditionally lost money for decades, and their domestic e-commerce is still only about 2% profitable gross margins, the last figures I heard. So, I mean, Prime is a huge loss leader, and they'll still have, their hardware, like Alexa. I'm guessing that's profitable. I'm not really sure. And they'll still have studio and other things, and advertising and logistics. So, but if they're forced to divest Amazon Web Services, it's going to be a big blow to them. And Google, I think, is very vulnerable also, because they've had about 80 to 90% market share, and if some of their views are considered to be anti-competitive, then another competitor like Bing or somebody else, could potentially step in, especially as we're migrating more to voice and search is really at an inflection point right now. But the larger question is going to be who's going to be more powerful, governments or uh, um, big tech. And I think that the pandemic has a lot to do with it. Like if we go back to normal, then I think globalization will return and big tech companies will be more powerful. If the pandemic kind of lasts or reoccurs, then I think it's going to be more of a stalemate because the companies are getting more powerful, but by Fed policy also because of all the stimulus and also because of the stock market and the Robinhood and the retail investors. So I think that big tech is going to, even if you try to break them up, is going to be very powerful. But governments are becoming much more activist and stepping in as globalization starts to wane. As globalization wanes, then by corollary, nationalism increases, and as nationalism increases, government power increases. So it's kind of interesting. Like the governments, they've spent so much money on lobbyists and lobbying. I'm kind of a little bit surprised that it's not taking, because usually money speaks in politics. Like usually people are afraid to go against the lobbyists, but the people are also powerful as well. So it's kind of like a lot of competing forces.